In 2013, I went for 4 weeks to Sulawesi, an island of Indonesia. The first place I went to was Sangkang, which has a lake nearby, Lake Tembe. I took a boat trip down the river from Sangkang onto the lake. The river was completely built up on both sides. The houses were all on stilts, very high, and were made of wood. The area didn't look very inspiring, interesting to look at, but a challenge to live in. Once we got onto the lake, it was much nicer. There were numerous fishermen about, but people must also do some sort of aquatic agriculture because there were bamboo barriers and rows of bamboo stakes. An eagle was perched on a stake looking for supper. My guide later told me that the fishermen cultivate aquatic plants for the fish to shelter in and to feed on. We motored into a village of houseboats. One boat was being moved. 2 men in the front were guiding the houseboat, and 1 man in a motorboat at the back was pushing it. It was all very slow and calm. When the water level in the lake is high, the people cluster in a village near the shore. When the water level drops, they move to the deeper water in the centre of the lake. They often move 3 or 4 houseboats and tie them together so the families can socialise more. In the evenings, the young people often train for canoe races. The mothers go ashore for shopping every few days. The children go ashore to go to school. After a while, we pulled up at a ladies' houseboat with a French couple and 2 Dutch couples. The houseboat had a kitchen, storeroom, bedroom and a large but completely empty reception room. The roof hung over to create a narrow veranda on both sides and a larger outdoor sitting area on one end. There were other rafts piled high with bits and bobs tethered to the houseboat. Our hostess gave us hot tea and freshly fried bananas, which were delicious. After the other tourists left, I sat there with my guide, listening to the lapping of waves onto the boat and thoroughly enjoyed the peace and quiet. This place was pretty close to heaven. In the afternoon, I found my way to a silk weaving village nearby. I wandered off the road and down a little pathway amongst the banana trees and coconut palms. There were houses scattered around, each one on stilts, with the area under the house enclosed by bamboo slats. The houses all had weaving equipment underneath, but there were only a few people at work because it was so hot. I very much wanted to go to Torajaland because it is the centre of a fascinating and very vibrant local culture with unusual architecture, serious funeral rituals and also a burgeoning whitewater rafting and trekking scene. My first task was to find a guide or to get found by a guide. Did I really need one? I ended up with a guide and a driver. We visited 5 places and I realised that I definitely did need a guide. The sites are all tucked away down tiny little roads with not a signpost to be seen anywhere, so that finding any particular place would have been like looking for the proverbial needle in a haystack. As well as that, the guide was invaluable in explaining what it was that I was seeing. Without his knowledge, I wouldn't have had a clue what it was that I was looking at. The first place we went to was Kesu, the centre of Torajan identity, with many old rice barns. Every Torajan family has a plot of land with a rice barn. They cannot be bought or sold because they are symbolic of the family's identity. This place also had a collapsing ceremonial stand and a collection of menhirs. Each ceremonial stand is built specifically for a funeral. When your funeral is over, the stand is allowed to disintegrate naturally over time. Part of the funeral ceremony involves digging up a rock and placing it in the ceremonial ground. All the locals know which menhir belongs with which deceased family member, and for once, size doesn't matter. The next 3 sites all had graves hewn out of rock or high up cliff faces. There were coffins scattered about or placed carefully in niches. Most stunning of all were the tol, life-size models of the deceased, dressed in their best clothes and completed with jewellery or work tools. The following day I teamed up with another tourist and we went on a tour of the countryside. These tonkanan, or rice barns, were everywhere. They were obviously still very much a major part of local life. Some had the most exquisite carvings and decorations. We saw another ceremonial funeral ground with lots of menhirs in the centre. The locals all know which rock belongs with which ancestor, so they can come and spend some time with their loved ones if they want to. By this time I was ready for a change of pace, so I headed off for a day of whitewater rafting. My last 2 days in Torajaland were spent trekking in the countryside. We set off up a very, very long hill, walking past houses, rice barns, satellite dishes, buffaloes, chickens, dogs, and all the normal stuff of everyday life. Everyone smiled at me. The kids all tumbled around but stopped to stare and say, "Hello, mister." Almost every adult chatted with Amos as we passed. "Where are you going? How far have you walked today? Why have you only got one tourist? Is she alone?" There was probably more, but my guide was being diplomatic. I saw 2 types of rice being cultivated. One variety is the traditional rice. It takes about 5 months to grow, has better nutritional value and greater cultural and ceremonial value. This rice is harvested, dried and stored in top knots. The second variety arrived about 100 years ago. It only takes about 3 months to grow and is stored in sacks. This rice is the ordinary everyday rice and has no cultural value except that it is eaten 3 times a day and people here would starve without it. The villagers mostly grow the rice for their own consumption. Those who can produce a surplus may sell some, but they also tend to store that surplus in order to be able to feed the extended family and the village during ceremonial occasions. This is why the Tonkinans are so important. This is the house of the family where we stayed the night. They also had 8 rice barns of various ages, which had the most amazing decorations all over them. And just to prove that teenagers everywhere are all the same, this is a hut where they can meet to hang out. And I even saw some graffiti somewhere. Having seen all I wanted in Torajaland, it was time for some beach and some snorkelling. I took a ferry from Gorontalo to the Togian Islands and then took a tiny little boat to another little island and stayed at a place called Poyalisa. I stayed in a bungalow on the beach with my own mandi. A mandi is a big tub full of water that you use for washing. The bungalow cost $15 and included full board. I also had my own hammock on the veranda and my own resident rat. The food was wholesome and plentiful. Fruit salad and cake for breakfast, rice, fish and assorted vegetable dishes for lunch and dinner, and a sweet snack in the afternoon. Fresh water for washing was brought across in blue plastic barrels and poured into our wash tubs through a spout set in the bathroom wall. I spent my days lazing around, reading, chatting to the others, snoozing on the beach, and snorkelling in the water. For snorkelling it was really easy. I just had to walk into the water just outside my hut and there were the fish all around. Some days our host organised a small boat and a picnic lunch for a group of us, and we spent the day visiting other islands and snorkelling off their beaches. It was paradise. I was loath to leave, but after 10 days of bliss in paradise, I had to pack my gear, say goodbye to all my newfound friends, and slowly make my way back to Gorontalo and from there back to Australia. All good things have to come to an end, I suppose.